And I never thought about money, and I still don't. I never even thought about it once. I swear. I never thought about it. I never thought about having to make a living. I just like, this is what I do, and this is what I'm doing.
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm thrilled as always to be here with you. I'm super privileged and honoured to introduce Mr. Mick Rossi as the guest this episode. We had the pleasure of spending an hour with Mick. We did need to let him go after an hour, so we always say we barely scratched the surface, and it's definitely the case with this one. Amongst many dozens of key collaborations, Mick spent, or continues to spend, many years with the Philip Glass Ensemble, working with both Philip Glass himself and the ensemble more widely. And since 2010, Mick has also been the percussionist and keyboard player with Paul Simon. So those two artists alone, but as you'll hear, there is so much more to it than that, including Mick's own prodigious solo output. So many artists, it's hard to fathom. So I'll let you jump in and listen, and I'll talk to you at the end of the show. Mick, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, particularly giving up a valuable Friday night. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you. It's so kind of you to invite me to do this.
It's funny. I was just watching an episode of Jimmy Kimmel where he was talking to Springsteen in Brooklyn, because he spent a week in Brooklyn. So there you go.
Okay.
Yeah. So now, Mick, I thought we'd kick off just talking about your last year or two. I mean, you've been an incredibly busy musician always, but just what have you been up to over the last year or two?
Well, let's see. A lot of the stuff goes by, and then I'm on to the next thing. So I'll try to recall. But most recently, of course, I was on a really good Paul Simon tour with whom I've been working for years and years, and I think I've done the last 8 or 9 tours with him. But this was related to a new piece that he wrote called 7 Songs. It's like a chamber thing. You know about it. It's very, very cool. And that was like really a long tour, like 5 months almost straight, which is, I haven't been doing that straight these days. And coolest part about it is because, I get to play so many instruments. I get to play all of this crazy percussion, like Harry Partch, microtonal instruments, mallets, piano, of course, and Rhodes and all that stuff. So it was really a fun time. And as always, a great, incredible band, as well as a bunch of Philip Glass stuff. In fact, they've got a tour coming up next week in Europe with the ensemble, and then going back. So there's 2 new recordings I have that have not been released officially. So that I did last year. And let's see, was I in Venice last year? No, that was still, I was in Venice for a residency, and I'd have to look at my schedule. I just can't remember.
Yeah, no. I mean,
last week I'm having trouble, remembering last
right.
week. So, yeah.
No, look, I mean, that gives an amazing idea, and we're obviously going to come back to both those artists and also your own solo work. I have that on the agenda, so we'll definitely do that. We'll now cast back a year or 10 to your childhood and musical upbringing. So what got Mick Rossi into music in the first place, and, those formative years?
My dad, an accordionist, growing up in Trenton, New Jersey, state of Bruce Springsteen, actually. Jersey, right? He was a great accordion player, and I had 2 brothers who were kind of musical. He started everyone off on piano, and I started playing when I was 4, and then I began studying with him, and I was an improviser from the beginning, and he forced me to read, which is really, I'm grateful for. But I was glad that he didn't shut down my ear, my whole training in that regard. And then I started playing drums at about the age of 7, and then I started studying drums. Then, it happened in like grade school, where the orchestra conductor needed instruments, so he would just point to me and go play that. I'd be like, okay. So I started playing timpani. I became, I was a percussionist there. Then I started, he goes, I need an oboe. I'm like, I don't even know what that is. And then I started playing oboe, which is insane. which nobody ever does willingly. Beautiful instrument. But yeah, so that was this. I was playing those three instruments and playing with a symphony and then playing drums in like a Queen Zeppelin band. I was playing drums with my father's club day band. We had these great musicians, great tenor player, and I was still studying Chopin and Bach, and then eventually, I don't know what I did. I never thought about it. I went to college.
Yeah.
And then I started studying privately with Dennis Sandoli. I don't know if you're familiar with Sandoli in Philadelphia. He's teacher of many people, including Coltrane and Pat Martino, Brecker, all those guys. So I don't know. What does that mean? That means that I had a very diverse, happy childhood in that way. I was lucky that I could do that. Eventually, my dad and I would butt heads, and I eventually went to other teachers.
Yeah.
So
That, no,
it's
that's
kind
amazing.
of
And I mean,
it.
no, that's great. I'm fascinated, Mick, by you made a point there about, you know, you didn't have your ear-based musicianship sort of not beaten out of you, but you know what I mean, as far as you didn't lose that as well as being able to read, which is an incredible privilege, as you know. So I
Yes,
assume that's still to this day, you use a mix of those approaches with your playing.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm really an improviser. Uh, The music I write, I try to make sound like it's improvised, and the music that I improvise, I want to make it almost sound as if it's written. So it's a weird hybrid of all that. But yeah, I I teach at the New School here in New York. And I would never shut down anyone for having poor reading skills, as long as their ears were working. And it all depends on if you want to end up at the New York Philharmonic, then you got to, you know,
Yeah.
you can't be an improviser. I don't know. For me, I was lucky I had both sides of that because I was somehow, my DNA granted me some ears,
Yeah.
and my dad had enough diligence to like keep me on the line about being practical too, which we would fight about a lot, including in the music that I would write myself. And then he wanted me to, make money. And I never thought about money, and I still don't. I never even thought about it once. I swear. I never thought about it. I never thought about having to make a living. I just like, this is what I do, and this is what I'm doing. I say no to a lot of things, and I'm not on social media. I don't know. That's the long answer. Sorry, you didn't even ask
Yeah,
this
no, I
question.
love it. No, that's brilliant. And so, Mick, I mean, obviously, with that incredibly diverse training and moving into early adulthood, what was some of the more so I'm thinking about here a bridge between that and playing with the Philip Glass Ensemble and so on. What were some of those earlier gigs and bands that led to you believing, well, I am actually making a living out of this?
Well, I actually never even thought that, even when it was happening, that I was making a living at it. I don't know why. I was lucky. Call it like denial and complete delusional, like aspiration. But I just did it, it was weird. But one of the early things, of course, Sandoli had a big effect on me because I was probably 20 when I started doing that. And, I stayed with him for 4 years. Maybe I was 19. And, his approach was absolutely abstract, like completely impractical music. If you have your own voice, you could really gain a lot of insight into the composition. So it was nothing you could say, this is compositional. You just had these devices, but otherwise, so he was a big influence. But some of the early things, like I was in Angie Bofield's band. Did you know who Angela Bofield was? New York
No, the name rings a
R&B.
bell. Oh, yep, yep.
Yeah, she was great. She passed away a few years ago, but that was I was in my early 20s. That would have been the first time I really did any real touring. So I was very lucky to run into that. It was a great band. It was all, Phyllis Hyman, Nona Hendrix, all those guys, the Barkays, all those really great bands from the 70s. So yeah, that was probably the first thing where I started. Actually, I was like, wow, because I lived close to New York, Trenton. I don't know if you know it, but it's almost halfway between Philly and New York. So I could study in Philly, study in Trenton, studied in New York, played all those places. But that was really what maybe got me to New York. Not that I cared about going to New York. I was just like, I'm just going to write music. So that maybe Angie was probably the first thing. Yeah. Yeah.
And those early touring experiences, Mick, I mean, in spite of your training but doing more regular gigging, if not, I'm not sure whether you're touring around the country at that stage, but what was that learning curve for you like as far as the business rather than the musicianship of it?
I guess I learned there's a certain amount of court politics in all of this, right? So I remember being asked if I wanted to do the record, the new record. We were touring around the country as well. Yeah. In fact, I was a kid. I was playing at like the Garden and like the Superdome and all this craziness. It's not something I even cared about doing. And not only that, these artists, including I'll just like go off on a tangent for a second.
Play.
Paul, Philip, even I worked with Simon, I worked with Sting, I worked with Hall Oates. These are guys I would never even I never thought about. In fact, to this day, I still don't know the words "You Can Call Me Out." I don't even know what he's saying. Just I'm just like, I'm just doing it. I'm there. I'm not listening. I don't listen to words. I'm kind of an idiot that way. But so they were people that I had no interest in, and when it popped up, I had friends talk me into it. Like I remember when Philip called, and I called my friend out in LA. My friend John Valentino is a great guitarist, and I'm like, I don't want to play this music, because I was like, what am I going to do with this? He goes, are you insane? So he talked me into that. I'm so glad I did because Philip is unbelievable, special human being. And it turns out all of them, Paul, I never owned a Paul record, because of my really esoteric, physic-minded stupidity. I would think I got no interest in that in a way. It wasn't that I was incurious, but so after working with them all, I see how brilliant they are, and it taught me a lot to just shut up and
Yeah.
be grateful, which I am, but don't be so judgmental right at the top. Well, it wasn't that. I didn't care. I'm in some weird universe, and it served me well because I don't, I had some strange family situation. My brother committed suicide and, all this kind of, everybody's got this story, but music was like, I just went there and kind of, I never got in trouble, so.
I don't think you're unusual, particularly in regards to lyrics. I think half the keyboard player community don't, I know I don't, although bizarrely enough, one of about 5 songs I do know the lyrics to is You Can Call Me Al, funnily enough. But no, I don't think that's unusual, and I think it's because we're so focused on the music. I do have to ask now, Mick, you just mentioned Philip Glass called you. Now, for someone, even though you may have been unaware of it to some extent at the time, for someone to call you of that notoriety, what did they see in you to call you? I know that's a hard question when you're the person they're calling, but why had you come to his attention that he felt you'd be a valuable part of the ensemble?
Well, it's kind of a simple reason. 2 reasons. One is that I play both drums, percussion, and keyboards. And a tour came up where they needed both for the tour. So one was Scotzi, which was keyboards, and one was Poacazzi, which is percussion. And another, I forgot, it was another program. So that was the practical aspect of it. Turns out that I have friends in the ensemble too, back in the day. So word of mouth, that kind of thing. Somebody recommended me because they knew I played both. And that was pretty much it. I started that and I've been doing it ever since. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, was there a formal audition process required there, or did you just slot in, Mick?
Never. I went to Singapore. I had a sound check. That was pretty much it. I never.
Wow.
We didn't know. I'll tell you one thing, Philip. There's no rehearsal ever. Almost never.
Yeah.
Unless it's a brand new thing, like the Leonard Cohen thing or something. So yeah. So you walk out. You're sound check. Hour and a half later, you've did it. What have I done? Am I fired? So that's pretty much it. No audition. No.
And so what was for that first gig then, Mick, what was the prep that you needed to do for that? I mean, people obviously are aware of Philip's work and it's incredibly diverse. And yeah, like what sort of preparation were you able to do to pull that off?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I forgot. Sorry. The third piece was La Belle et la Bête, the Cocteau film that we played. It was really a handful. I mean, it's hard. 2 manual, Anyway, that was it. So the only reason I thought it was because the prep was, of course, I got all the music. had recordings, just like anything. And, at least I have the score, look it over, trying to figure out how I can play like that for so long without stopping and play that many notes. But I've always had pretty good hands, so, but that was it. I went into the famous Looking Glass Studios, which was Philip's old space on Bleecker Street, and asked if I could just have like an hour or two on the whole rig, not because I just wanted to see, because there's patches, you know what it's like, right? So I did do that, but it was interesting. I was in the live room practicing this music, though. It was La Belle et la Bête that I needed to practice. And there was an interview going on in the control room, and I saw like a video camera and a guy and a mic and then this beautiful woman. And I'm like I'm like practicing. I'm like, what the hell? I'm looking. Turns out it was David Bowie. This Bowie is like, that's the most beautiful man I've ever seen, I think, in my life. And it was just
That's amazing.
stupid. Yeah. So that was my preparation. I forgot I did go in there that one day on my own. This was weeks before, maybe a week or two before the tour.
And so I do have to ask, even though we're not a technology-based podcast, we're about the playing, but Mick, when you mentioned about playing the full rig, as much as you can recall, as you know, keyboards changes on, what roughly was the full rig at that stage?
In those days, like, it's all gotten so streamlined, as you might imagine now, but they were old PVs.
Oh, wow.
And I can't remember the model, but the big, heavy weighted 88 key weighted ones. Yeah, so that's what we used for a long time. And they went away, they died, and eventually Michael Reisman, Philip's really brilliant music director, and he's the guy that does all the samples and stuff. And we streamlined everything down to the point where we now travel with like 3 or 4 Mac Minis and backline weighted keyboards, so they could be anything from like a Kurzweil to a Roland to, but all have to be like a good instrument. So that's where we're at now. At one point, we were using those Yamaha P155s. We actually brought those out, but then it's gotten even more streamlined now. It's almost all backline.
And I do. So I just while we're on that side of things, that you say, as you mentioned, you're about to go out on tour again with Philip. So you said 4 or 5 Mac Minis. So you're running what main stage gig before? What are you running on that?
You know what he's running? It's Bidgewell. Do you know this app?
Oh, Bidgewell, yes, of course.
Bidgewell.
Sorry, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like any of that. It's just, I don't know what the front end is. It might be that. And it used to be like Sample Cell. It was Pro Tools for a long time. We had the huge refrigerators, and then those went away. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that's what it is, although I stay away from it as much as possible. Because not that I can't do it, but I don't even know about it. Because every sound check, of course, I'll play something and it'll be like, where is it? Oh, it's like 5 octaves up here. It's got to be moved, or something. So I let Michael do that, though, and the sound guys.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And so over the years of the ensemble, it's a significant number of years now. Obviously, the music has continued to evolve. I know you've been involved on more than 9 of the recordings. How is that, from your viewpoint as a musician? What is your view over the years of how it's matured and what you've continued to learn or enjoy as a player within the ensemble?
You mean the music has matured, or I've matured as a musician?
Both, I would say.
Yeah. I will tell you this, that in whatever year it is now, 26 years, I'm still trying to figure out how to play this music. It is really a beast, and especially the really hardcore early minimalist stuff, that music in 12 parts. And in fact, I pulled this out just so you want to see, you probably can't see it, but this is like my life for a lot of the time.
Wow.
This goes on for pages and pages and pages. So this happens to be Crayoniscati, like the middle of Crayoniscati.
I just broke out in a cold sweat, Mick, just looking at that.
Yeah, but I've been playing it for 20 years, over 25 years probably. But the one thing I learned the most is, well, it's a couple of things. I will say, first off, it's amazing to be playing with people that are still living and making new things, like a guy like Phil, and Paul too, but Philip we did a lot of new projects together, Orion and Book of Longing and a lot of stuff. But having said that, having recorded music in 12 parts for the first time I ever played it in Italy, I don't know if you know that piece is about 4.5 hours long, and it's just
Yeah.
unplayable, pretty much. There will be, as you talk about train wreck, somebody will melt down eventually somewhere in that
Yeah.
thing, but I've learned how to play his music because you're a keyboardist, right? A pianist. And if you don't relax, you can't waste any energy whatsoever. And gearing up for pieces like that, it's almost like trying to run a marathon in a way. You just have to like pace yourself up to the point and you have to relax. So the most that I think I probably matured is learning how to relax. You can't force anything. You can't hit keyboard hard, most of the time, because a lot of it is just farfisa samples. So it's on or off. There's not even any velocity to those. So if you're starting, trying to play with any kind of like feeling, and I don't mean feeling, but like velocity sensitive, like emotion, you're not gonna make it to the end. You're just gonna burn out, you know? You're just gonna get tight, your hands are gonna hurt, So I never have any issues. So but I have learned that. And what was the other question? Was it
Oh, it was just really, yeah.
how
No,
is
I think you've covered that nicely, and you've also raised a parallel point, which I assume your training as a drummer and percussionist. That stamina issue is obviously a big issue in that area as well. So, I mean, how are
yeah.
the hands holding up? I mean, it's a big physical output across a show.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm good. I swear. I've never felt better. My chops have never felt better. It's a lot of years of playing that music and figuring out how to do it. And it's really kept, even when I'm not touring with him, I will practice some of that music just to keep it in my hands. And it's actually good for me, for anyone, I think. So,
Absolutely.
but the drum thing, yeah, the percussion thing, the time thing is really important, as it is with anyone. But yeah, I don't know, I couldn't do without one or the other. I would miss it, if I didn't
Yeah.
have that.
Yeah. It's definitely a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
Like we could spend 4 hours just talking about your time as part of the Philip Glass Ensemble, but obviously, aside from your percussion and keyboard work, I know you've done a bit of conducting in that as well, and I'm going to
Mhm.
call it locally. I know you conducted as part of the ensemble at the Sydney Opera House. Just tell us a little bit about your
Yeah.
recollections of that. That
Oh man, that I really love that show. It it was called Book of Longing. Do you know this piece at all?
I do. Yep.
It was a different thing. It wasn't quite the normal ensemble. It was like a little chamber band, right? And with four singers. And Philip was on the stage, and half the time he fell asleep. We were like, he didn't have much to play, you know. And yeah, it was very cool. I in that show. In fact, we learned it all together. I played percussion and keyboards, moving back and forth between marimba and that was my part. And the reason I came to conduct it, although I have conducted other ones where it wasn't such a harrowing initiation. Reisman was riding his bike and he got doored in Milan, I think it was. And when I tell you, I was lucky because I knew the piece so well, but this is 4 o'clock and I'm tuning drums
Wow.
and just getting ready for sound check. And the stage manager and the tour manager comes up and goes, Reisman's in the hospital. What are we going to do? I'm like, fuck, like, what? So I combined my percussion and piano book with his book. He mostly didn't have a lot to play because he was conducting. So I had all the heavy lifting anyway. But I had to leave the percussion book out and I had to combine his book and my book. So there was no percussion that night. And I had to conduct it on the spot pretty much. It was pretty much what happened on that one. And then I eventually ended up doing a bunch of them, Sydney and a bunch of other cities because he was still laid up and he wasn't able to make any of it. But the others, though, that I have done, I did Dracula a bunch of times. I was hired. I wasn't like, it wasn't an emergency, both with the ensemble and with Kronos, with Philip and Kronos Quartet. So, um, Yeah, but the Sydney thing, man, that was a blast because I'd been there before, and I just remember my dressing room was so great because I had a big Steinway D in it, and
Yeah.
it had to be about 30 feet long, the room, all windows overlooking the bridge, and
Yeah.
just that place. So I don't know, it's kind of epic. It was a thrill.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I have to ask, so that emergency night at the Opera House, you were still playing keyboards as well as the conducting.
Yes, that was not at the Opera House though. That was in Milan.
Okay,
The
sorry. Yeah.
emergency night. Yeah. Sydney thing came later on in that tour. There were
Yeah.
a bunch of other. Yeah. Yes, I was because I had to play all my parts plus
Yeah.
his parts. And I had to kind of combine them and figure out which ones were necessary for the piece. And some marimba stuff I had to play because there was no marimba, so I had to transfer it. And, it's basically, there was a bit of improvising going on in that, which is cool. And I have done a lot of improvising with Philip. There was a trio that I was in for a long time with Wendy Sutter, the great cellist, where I played all that stuff. I played percussion and mallets and piano and improvised pretty much the entire thing, actually. So, which was really fun.
And I know we've only got so much time, but I was really interested in that area in the Philip Glass Ensemble as far as the role of improvisation versus the charts, because,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I mean, is it possible to encapsulate the approach here? Obviously, I assume it varies by the piece and Philip's
Yeah.
approach to the performance. And
There's very, very, very little improvisation, almost none. That just happened to be a different, they called it the Philip Glass Chamber. It was just a trio. And I improvised because there was no drum parts written, no percussion
yeah,
parts. And, it was celeste. So a little celeste part was written, that kind of thing. But, yeah, so in general, there's almost none. In Einstein on the Beach, there is one piece called Building where there's a big tenor solo that plays over this ostinato thing we do. It was craziness. That's improvised, but rarely does this ever come up. Yeah. So, in fact, Philip, on that tour, it was the first time Philip ever played a note that wasn't written.
ah,
Wendy and I got him to, and he was like, "I'm so sorry, Nadia, Boulanger." He was like apologizing to Nadia Boulanger. I was like, "Phil, just play, hit the inside, just pluck the string or something." It's like trying to get him to do something crazy, 'cause he was game.
it's great. And
Yeah.
so, one last Philip Glass question. Obviously, he's an iconic artist. And so, what is the collaborative approach, if there is any collaborative approach, as far as preparing for performances and depending on the piece, the band as a unit? How does that work? As far as Philip is very much a band leader, and this is the way it goes, which is not uncommon, or there is a little bit more to and fro with it.
What I'll say is that Philip is mostly hands off. That's Michael Reisman or who's ever conducting at the time. He's the one running the whole thing, really. So, like I said on tour, we just have a sound check, and we've been playing all this music for a lot of years.
That's
It's
right.
just, it's a lot of quirky things because that music is loud a lot of the time, and it's hard to hear, and the parts are intricate and you could get thrown so easily. So you got to know what you want to listen for. And there was a time when we all went to all in ears, which I don't like. So I went back to a monitor, but everybody has their own little thing. I had a little mixer for a while. And then, so yeah, so Phil, although he's not touring with us now, he's 88.
Yeah.
He's stopped for the past couple of years. Phil would just be, a couple of note, play like the low note. He didn't have a lot to do because he was just getting old. His hands were getting a little arthritic. So he was basically hands off. He's cool. Reisman's very smart. We all get along great. I remember one time we sounded so bad, and we come off the stage, and Phil was like, "Hey, that was great, guys." He's like so positive. He never like yelled us ever at anyone. I've never heard him like say anything like that. But yeah, it could be loose even within the structure, the
Yeah.
structured playing. So
No, great
yeah,
perspective. Thank
uh,
you. And I
yeah,
can't think of a more polar opposite artist, but we'll move on to this before we go on to a lot of other things. Paul Simon. I mean, so
I know.
So it doesn't get much more different than that. So
It's
tell us
true.
about how that relationship came about, how you joined Paul in 2010.
That is just so wacky. In fact, I love that about it, that they're so diametrically opposed in a way. I got a message from Paul, phone, voicemail, and it was so ridiculous. He goes, Mick, uh, I don't know if you know him. He's kind of shy, he's
Yeah.
quiet. And, uh, this is Paul Simon. I'm a friend of Philip Glass, and I was wondering if you want to join the band. I call him back. I'm like, I know who you are. Are you crazy? Like I was, he was so, but it wasn't like fake. It was like really,
No.
he's so yeah. So I had a couple friends in that band also over the years. Andy Snitzer, Mark Stewart, Jamie Haddad. There's a lot of great people in that. But Philip recommended me for recording. Actually, sorry, that was not to join the band. That was to actually do a recording with him. And then after I did the recording, he did call and ask if I wanted to join the band. So that's how that came about. And I was so grateful. I was like,
Absolutely.
wow.
And because it's so different, Mick, what was your approach? I mean, obviously you're an incredibly experienced musician by this stage, but were there any learning curves there as far as just getting your head around the material? And as you know, Paul Simon's own stuff goes from folk through to electronic and in between.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
what was the approach there?
You know, I just have to say his music is very complex in this kind of a simple way, and it's such a respite for me to do Paul because requires it's almost all just instinct,
Yeah,
and I love that about it. And he's cool, and I got a lot of room, and but I know about all that stuff playing, any of these styles I can do. I didn't study them, but it's just, and that music is naturally just sort of it, it kind of plays itself. It's sort of the only
yeah,
thing I could say about it. And so with him, he's the opposite of Phil. All he does want to do is rehearse. It's
yeah.
like days and days and days, which I find kind of cool because I never do that. And it's like in a band, and you're like going over the same, 8 bars for like, half hour. It's more for him. But he's very meticulous, and although he's loosened up lately, but he knows what he doesn't want. I will say that. And he's kind of a savant orchestrator. Like he just will be like, leave that out. How about, can you do something like this? And we'll go, no, not that. Too many notes, usually is the case. But we have a, we have a funny relationship, Paul and I, in that because he's friends with Philip, I showed him a photo of a dressing room sign from Dallas or something of the Philip Jones Ensemble. They spelled it wrong. They got his last name wrong. This was the Opera House, I think, in Dallas. So over the years now, he'd always want me to do something because I do a lot of prepare piano stuff,
Yeah.
and he'd always want me to do something crazy, which I love. I'm like, yeah, who does this in a pop concert? I have this crazy avant-garde, like insane solo at the end of Cool Cool River, but I always go, hey man, Phil Jones, do some Phil Jones, and be like, okay, so I'll do something like Philip, Philip like, you know.
No, that's amazing. And again, just briefly, I mean, I know you still, correct me if I'm wrong, but with Paul Simon, the really extensive touring is essentially
Mhm.
done, but there are sort of one-off shows here and there. And I mean, Paul's struggles with his hearing and that have been well
Yeah.
documented. We don't need to go into that. But what essentially is your keyboard rig now when you do play a show?
It's so amazing. I have Steinway B, which I go to Steinway and pick out, and they're kind enough to. I have the old Fender Rhodes that Richard T played for all those years,
Wow.
which is Paul's, but I always call it T's Rhodes, really. I have a harmonium. I have celeste. I have a vibraphone. I have a glockenspiel. I have these cloud chamber bowls. I've got chimes, orchestra bells, tubular bells. And over the years, a lot of hand drum, snare drum. In this case, I think that's all I had on the last thing. It was just usually B3, but there's no B3 on this one.
Okay.
In fact, I had a C3 out for a long time.
Wow.
And yeah, usually, but those were the more up, like pop hit stuff and the arena thing. So we didn't even need organ on this thing. So like I said, it was so quiet. There were no any monitors. Like I could hear the other side of the stage,
Yeah.
without it. Cello, flute, viola. It's great. So yeah, so that's it. Never, almost never. I did have one like keyboard that I would play a couple samples, and in which case, Paul bought one of Harry Partch's Harmonium. The big keyboard that's like 30 notes per octave or something.
Yeah.
So we sampled some of that, and there was one or two pieces where I used the bass pedals from the organ, triggered those, and another thing where I was playing like a Doombeck, but I had to have a low, bowl, not tabla, but an udu, like an udu pot.
Oh,
You know
yep.
what that sounds like? So it's like a dong. So it would be like this, be like second, dong, then I'd hit a keyboard, dong, I'd hit one note on the keyboard. So, anyways, usually there's no electronic keyboard over by me. The Rhodes is the most electronic thing there
Yeah.
is, and that's yeah. So, which I love because he loves using the real stuff.
And
And I'm lucky I get to do that. I get to play all those things, and there's no cheating, no cheaping out on it.
that's right.
Yeah, I'm
And
lucky.
over that time, Mick, particularly probably those early years, sort of 2010 through to say 2018. What are some highlights for you as far as when you did perform and tour? Are there some key gigs that you particularly enjoyed? Some highlights?
Yeah, a lot of them, I will say, I put. It was bittersweet because on the night of our 2016 election, I was in London playing at Royal Albert Hall, which I
Mm,
love. I love that. I love that place because the people are close,
yeah,
so anyway, so that sticks out in my mind because I just love playing there. But then I woke up to what I was suspecting anyway, alas, and you're lucky you're as far away as possible. So, but we won't get into that. But yeah, so that was it. A lot of places like, Hollywood Bowl. In fact, the Hollywood Bowl LA Philharmonic was the first concert I played with Philip, where I met my girlfriend, came to hear. I'm like, dude, crazy? Look at this. First gig that she saw me do with Phil. So I like the Hollywood Bowl, I like Red Rocks, and I
yeah,
like this concert hall in Hamburg. It's a small hall. I'm trying to think. They're all, after a while, they run together, all the arenas. I can't find my way around.
yeah,
So many great times.
yeah.
I can't complain about any of it really. And the travel is all very civilized.
It is, yeah. And I think you've already alluded to this, Mick, but I mean, within the Paul Simon experience, as far as performing, you have a little bit more freedom. So there is a little bit of more improvisation that goes
I
on
got a
there.
lot of room. Yeah,
Yeah,
there are certain parts here and there, and of course it depends on the tune, but in general, I'm not playing the same thing every night. I got a lot of space. It's fun, and I don't mind playing the same thing here and there, but I'm not really built that way.
yeah.
Can't play the same thing once, right? That old joke.
That's I love it. Now, for the sake of our listeners and viewers around the world, Mick has collaborated with literally dozens and dozens of artists. So I already warned Mick on this. I was going to ask you, Mick, to call out some other collaborators. I mean, just for the sake of our listeners, everyone from Mahavishnu Project, Carly Simon, Johnny
Oh, the
Valentino,
mob
you
mission.
mentioned, Wynton
Uh-huh.
Marsalis, Aaron
Uh-huh.
Neville. Are there some highlights just from probably a musicianship viewpoint that you particularly enjoyed, or it might have been the actual performance itself? Yeah, what some that you would call out?
The big time thing is it's a different level of show business, which I appreciate. But I probably have the most fun with projects of my own and my brothers here in New York and in Brooklyn and the old downtown thing with, the old knitting factory stuff and all that and people like Andy Laster and Kermit Driscoll and uh, Dave Douglas and so many great people. Mark Dresser, I've had a chance to work with a lot over the years. Michael Serene, who I just had uh, dinner with yesterday. I don't know if you know him. He's a great
Right.
drummer. Yeah, it's too many to name. I can't even.
Yeah.
So many good collaborations. Yeah, I mean, even in my early days, I was composer in residence in a few dance companies where I wrote a lot of modern dance music, and those were really rewarding. Get to write whatever I want, and basically that's it. If I can do whatever I want, I'm happy.
Yeah.
If people are on me about, don't do that, don't do this, I'm just like, I don't need this, I got to get out. So,
Yeah, no, love it. And I know, I mean, this is probably a good point to talk about your solo work. I mean, you've released an
mhm,
amazing number of both solo albums or key collaborations with
mhm.
people. I mean, I know I've listened to Cut the Red Wire, love
Oh yeah.
Bangkok Cowboys,
Oh wow.
Stray from last year. Just talk a
Oh
little bit
thanks.
of, I mean, obviously this is a key part of your artistic psyche. And I mean, as you mentioned, going back to your childhood, you love doing your
Yeah.
own thing. You weren't necessarily worried about it being commercially successful, but I mean, there's some amazing music in there. Just tell us about broadly how you've managed to continue that solo output amongst everything else you've been doing.
Yeah. It's necessary for my brain to keep doing that, my soul, But some of these are projects that, like, for instance, I don't know if you got to hear 160, which I can explain a quick thing about the
Please.
title later, but that began as a small short documentary film, and I expanded the whole thing into a recording. Um, by Do you know the artist Jim Dine? He's an American artist,
No, I don't.
like a modernist, yeah. Anyway, his son is a great. Speaking of the oboe, he's a great oboist, and he made these oboe films, and so I did some scores for him. But that record, a lot of times I like doing all this stuff myself. I played everything on that, overdubbed everything, but it's all real. It's not. There's no sequencing and no. So I love doing that. I love, like, as you probably do, sit here, hit some stuff, record, overdub this, change stuff around. Well, anyway, because I have dyslexia, that record is really meant to be called 106 because the entire record was in the metronome marking of 106, not 160. And I never even noticed it. It went to the graphics people. The guy sent it to me, proofread it. Yeah, it's great. It's great. 160. It's not 160. It's 106. So, but I'm particularly proud of that record because I love how insane it is, and it's just not for everybody. It's really dense, and you probably need a drink after it because it's a lot, But I just love being on to the next thing that's different. I just don't want to do the same thing. And I had this couple of quintet records that I love doing, the Live at the Knitting Factory with Russ Johnson and Kermit, and that one was Dresser, I think. Um, I like doing those, and then I have this. I don't know if you got a chance to hear Live at Barbez.
No.
You should check that out. I think you would like that. It's like a surf, like, funk, terrible marching band thing. It's just awful. But I like that. In fact, I'm getting ready to do a second record with them. That was a live one
Great.
with, yeah. So there's that. That's very different. And then I have the live one from MoMA from a solo piano record. And then there was a studio solo record. Each one, I just try to do a different thing almost every time. That's all I
Yeah,
can say is just want to make it
no.
different.
And the diversity is incredible across your catalog to date. And I think you mentioned at the start of the show, you've got another two sort of coming up.
Yeah, this saxophone slash trumpet player named Caleb Wheeler Curtis. Do you know this guy? He's a
No,
kid. I don't think he's 40. He's amazing. In fact, I just saw him yesterday too. So that's coming out. It's called Runt. Um, it's mostly a improvised duo record, actually, with him. So
great.
yeah, and like I said, I'm on to pre-production for that's called Antimatter, my band called Antimatter, the live one from Barbez. So I have all the music written. It's been sitting there for 10 years, probably longer now. So I never get to the other stuff. And this time I said, I'm going to go record this music that's sitting here because I moved on to the
Hmm.
next thing so fast. I leave all that behind. So, but I'm not sentimental about it.
No, I think you raised a great point there about not being sentimental. I think that shines through with what we've chatted on. A common question we ask our guests is the whole imposter syndrome thing. And this may not be an issue. It isn't for a lot of artists, but have there been times through your career you have actually doubted yourself, or you're more of I'm not sentimental. I go with the flow. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah, I will say I'm not affected by that. I could probably apply more scrutiny to my own, whatever I end up working on. But I will tell you this, that I don't judge my music because everything else I'm so judgmental about it. And if I write something and in a couple of measures, I'll know whether I'm going to scrap it or not. But if I go further, I just get to the end and that's it. I rarely edit or go back and fix. And if it's bad, I accept that and I'm okay. And I don't care actually. It's because what I did, it's what I did,
Yeah.
So it's a little bit existential, I guess, but
No, totally
I don't
valid
know.
perspective. No, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know what that imposter syndrome is. I mean, it's people who, I mean, of course, I've been on things where I'm like, I'm wrong for this, I'm going to crash and burn, which, of course, every now and then you get fired from something. But, I never thought that. I just knew I was wrong. I didn't feel like an imposter, though.
Yeah. No, absolutely great perspective. And we do need to ask Mick about an onstage train wreck. So is there one that you can look back upon and laugh and go, wow, that did not go well?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It doesn't happen often, though. I have to say that I had to reach back to try to think about it. But every every year, I end up doing this benefit for Philip called the Tibet House here in
Yeah.
New York. This is Tibet House Benefit and brings together all these really interesting groups and bands and artists, and everybody plays like 15 or 20 minutes. Maybe there's 10 or 12 people. Laurie Anderson, I've done it with her. I've done it with Philip a million times. But 2 years ago, the ensemble did it, and we come out and you play like 15 minutes, and the piece that evening was going to be a short version of something from Music in 12 Parts, which I said was like 4.5 hours, but this was only going to be 20 minutes, part eight, which is really brutal. But to play for 15 minutes, I'm like, this is it's like going to bed and waking up in the Bahamas or something. So easy. But so what happened is we're on to like the first 8, 12 measures of this thing that's just, blistering fast. And the keyboards are like at least 2 or 3 cents away from you, like not even microtonal. It's like a whole step high. One of them is Michael's. So it turns out because these are all backline rentals, somehow MIDI information was being sent to pitch, and it was changing pitch, and it kept moving and getting higher and higher and higher. So I was like, okay to let it just keep going. In fact, I was kind of digging it. And I was like, this is so fucked up. I love this. But Riesman, this is Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
Carnegie Hall. Riesman stops everything, stops the band. And we're like, he gets up, walks across the stage, takes about 5 minutes to fix it. He figured it out that it was like, he goes in and he just fixes it, he turns off the pitch information. Then we started again. And we go. It wasn't, people were laughing and clapping, but it did kind of kill the buzz, though.
Yeah, it would have. That's an amazing.
Because usually we go out there and we just blow it out, But this
Yeah.
one was like, So and it's one I could think of, actually.
No, that's amazing. Love it. That's a classic. And then we do have the dreaded Desert Island Discs question, Mick. So 5 albums, if you have to pick them, what would they be?
I almost think of it more as what might have been influential to me.
Yeah.
Than if it's something I can't live without or something, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
In a way. But a few things come to mind. One is Keith Jarrett's solo record called Facing You. You know this record?
I do, yeah.
Unbelievable. Any Shostakovich symphony, particularly though the 15th, I love the best, his last one. Bernard Haitink's reading. I think it was Concert Gabot, or it might have been London Phil. I forgot.
I'll find it.
Yeah, Led Zeppelin 1.
Where?
I love that record so much. I think it's just, I don't think anyone's come even close, and none of this stuff, because they were really playing, those guys. It wasn't slick at all, They got a little slicker later, but it was still never slick. Another one would be Bartok's Music for Strings, Percussion, Celeste. Do you know this?
No, but I'll find it for sure. Yeah.
Well, if you ever have seen the Kubrick movie, The Shining, based on the Stephen King book, that score is in, and he's using that all over that. And then maybe the last thing, it's hard to, I mean, any Bach, like the Bach well-tempered clavier by anyone almost, a Gould, or even Heath did some nice ones, but I will mention one other one, which is probably six, and it's the Webern music, Five Pieces for Orchestra, I think it's called.
Our very last question is sort of a very brief 10-parter. We call it a quickfire 10. So, and I think some of these questions would be particularly amusing given the area you've worked in. So, due to some serious crime, you're sentenced to 6 months in a tribute band. What tribute band are you choosing?
None. I can't do
None.
it.
That's a valid question. That's a valid answer. I love it.
Maybe the Mahavishnu band, because that was like we were really playing that music, but I can't stand mimicking anything. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
valid. Before a gig, so it doesn't matter which artist or your own work, but what is an important pre-gig ritual for you to feel settled before you start a show?
Espresso.
Yeah. Great.
Pretty much it. I mean, it needs sleep, obviously, when
Yeah.
you're on the road over in Europe or something, but yeah,
Yeah.
coffee.
Very good. If you hadn't been a musician, what do you think your career choice would have been?
Well, I wanted to be a veterinarian.
Yep.
When I was a kid, I love animals so much that I couldn't bear to see me sticking knives in them and needles and, so maybe that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe.
No,
Yeah.
very good. Nearly impossible given the diversity of your career, Mick, but a favourite tour you've ever done?
I would have to say this last thing I did with Paul, this 5-month, 7 songs thing is up there with one of my
Right.
favorites because, yeah.
No, good pick.
Yeah.
And this is even harder. A favourite gig you've ever done?
I think that the solo piano concert that I did at MoMA was one of my favorite things ever. And a lot of it had to do with the instrument was so brilliant that, again, it's kind of played itself that's very dense too. If you want to listen to it, your head might explode, but it's a great instrument on that. So that one, yes.
No, I'll check that out. And I've had the privilege of going to MoMA. It's such an amazing space as well. So yeah,
Right?
it's a favourite city you've played, and it might be New York, but what's a favourite city for you?
Like having to do with the music at all, or just the
just
city in
probably
itself?
from your career, just something that stood out to you. I love this city.
I guess Paris.
Yeah, it's hard to go past Paris.
Where else could you?
Yeah. Again, probably an amusing question given your career, but name a song that you used to love, but you've now played it to death and would happily never play it again.
Let's see. Yeah, I can't. I'm sure there.
And a lot of people don't have
Must
one.
be.
A lot of professionals don't tend to have that. They tend to go, it's the song, I play it and I do the job and I get out of there. So that's a valid response.
Well, there's one piece by Philip that I really just do not like at all. It's called Dance 9 in the Upper Room. We don't play it that often, but when we do it, I do want to kill myself because I hate it. That one I do hate. I'm sorry, Phil.
Do you have a favorite music documentary or movie that stood out to you over the years?
No, you know why? Because I don't watch them.
Yeah, there you go.
Probably a lot of musicians don't, but
no, that's right.
I can't take the documentaries are okay. The dramatization, the fiction ones that are or the biopics, I can't do.
No, same.
No, not so much. No, not so much.
That's great. Name one thing you'd like to see invented to make your life as a keyboard player and percussionist, if you like, easier. Is there something you go, gee, this would make my life easier?
No, I got it all pretty dialed in, especially doing these kind of tours. The equipment shows up, and it's I don't.
Yeah, no,
I can't complain about any of it. Yeah, it couldn't be much easier actually that way.
No. And last but not least, is there a non-musical activity or hobby that keeps you sane outside of music? Is something you just like to do? Yeah.
Yes, a couple of things. I was a longtime cyclist, road bike cyclist. But since New York has become like anarchy on the roads with all that, I stopped riding, so I just work out inside now. My brain diversion is video games.
Yeah.
I play video games. Like the real narrative, the deep, not like trying to play against other people and kill things and all,
no.
Those games.
We'll be talking about that because I'm a gamer too, Mick.
Are you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll talk about that after we stop talking. I can't thank you enough, Mick. I mean, you've been incredibly generous spending an hour with us. I know we need to let you go. I always say we barely scratched the surface, but it's never been more evident in this chat. But still can't thank you enough. It's been absolutely amazing.
No, my pleasure, David. I'm so happy you hooked up with your podcast and I was a part of it. Thank you so much.
And there we go. I hope you enjoyed that. Look, I've admired every single one of the guests we've had on the show for their musicianship, and Mick is right up there. Some of that music he has to play is just incredible. I know some of you out there could well and truly give it a red hot go, but that is so many planes above my playing ability. But yeah, it was just amazing speaking with Mick for the time that we had him, and cannot thank him enough. And we are hoping to follow up down the track as well. Again, a huge thanks to you for listening. We hugely appreciate it. We love if you keep in touch. So we're on all the socials. Email is editor@keyboardchronicles.com. We still love guest suggestions. We have many more guests in the works that we're discussing times and days with, but we're open to suggestions. We just love hearing from you. Last but most definitely not least, our gold and silver supporters, the brilliant Dewi Evans from the sunny land of Wales. Thank you, sir. The lovely Tammy Catch from Tammy's Musical Stew all the way in Edmonton, Canada. Thank you, Tammy, as always. Mike and the team at Midnight Mastering. There you go, Mike. I said you had a team. It's Mike, but he does the job of a team. He's amazing. So if you do have mixing or mastering duties, please contact Mike. And then the amazing musicplay.com forums, and particularly the Keyboard Corner forum, are such an amazing place to hang out. So again, thank you for listening. We'll be back all too soon in a week or two. And until then, keep on playing.